Hi there, my name is Max, also known as the Rah Rabbit in most online spaces. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a system of about 8. Now, I was diagnosed officially with DID about 2 years ago now, but I was in the mental health system for many years prior to that. But unfortunately, nobody really knew what it was that I was experiencing, nor could they really offer me any kind of practical support or help. So for a very long time, I was pretty much just trying to figure these things out for myself. I was about 11 or 12 when I first started to hear Darren. And Darren is an alter or a part that is very angry and very aggressive, very threatening, and someone who also feels very threatened. He was this very kind of odd, paranoid person when he first appeared. And how I experienced that was, I do tend to hear my alters both sort of audibly and kind of outside my head, and also internally and more like internal monologue. I guess the experience tends to vary quite a lot. I don't know why or what that depends on, but for me that has generally been the experience that I have. And so when Darren first appeared, he very much felt like this outside presence, this thing, this person that had somehow come from somewhere else and was able to communicate with me, and he very much kind of felt that way as well. I never thought that Darren could be me. I never sort of saw that as a possibility at that age. I very much did believe he was a person from somewhere else, and I don't know, maybe I was special in some way and could communicate with him. And because of this, when I did finally start reaching out for help when I was about 14 years old, doctors weren't sure if what I was experiencing was psychotic in nature, because it definitely sort of sounded that way to them. And for about 4 years I was with the team, an early intervention into psychosis team. But even 4 years with them, they didn't think what I was experiencing was psychotic, but they couldn't really help me. They said it could be a dissociative disorder, and then I was discharged with no follow-up help. And then, from that sort of being told it might be a dissociative disorder to actually getting a diagnosis was another 10 years. Now, in the UK, there are no treatment guidelines for DID. In fact, I'm pretty sure on my records it's down as multiple personality disorder, so that should give you an idea of how far behind we are. Definitely on the NHS, there is absolutely nothing for dissociative disorders. So it's been really difficult for me to find the right kind of support and help, and it's been a journey that I've primarily had to do alone. Now, when I started college, I had 2 alters. I had Darren and I had Scott, and Scott was sort of the opposite to Darren in many ways. He was really friendly and nice and sociable and just loved people, and was generally this very positive kind of person. At that point, because I just had the 2 of them, I kind of saw it very much as the devil and the angel on the shoulder type thing. And whilst I was trying to sort of figure out what was going on with me, I started learning about lucid dreaming. I cannot remember for the life of me what got me interested in lucid dreaming, but I bought a book about it and I started learning it, and it became something that became like an integral part of who I am. Now, for people who don't know, lucid dreaming is when you are dreaming and you become aware that you're dreaming. So it's having conscious daytime awareness within a dream. This usually means that you can control the dream to some extent as well. That is primarily one reason why people get into lucid dreaming, is because they want to be able to, have full reign over their dreams and do whatever they want. And that is typically, I would say, one reason why people start learning lucid dreaming. I know for me, I kind of saw it as a way of having fun and just messing around. Didn't think of it as a particularly serious tool in any way. But as I sort of became, I guess, better and better at lucid dreaming, once I'd sort of got quite a good skill level with that, I'd started reading on different forums and things how people were using it for personal growth, to work through sort of their own issues. And it got me thinking of if I could potentially use this to understand my alters on a deeper level. Because after all, when you're in a dream, when you're in a lucid dream, you kind of have access to your subconscious mind. And my plan was to locate both Scott and Darren in a dream and to ask them why I experienced them. Why are they here? What do they represent? And how can I help? Or how can we work together? Now, I can ask them these questions during the day, but of course Darren is very, very defensive and doesn't really like to touch up on any kind of serious topics or anything like that. He'll generally avoid that. So I figured in a lucid dream, again, I'm closer to my subconscious mind. Perhaps I could break down that barrier. So I decided to start with Scott because I figured Scott would be quite an easy one. We have a good relationship in the waking world. He is generally, a much easier alter to sort of communicate with, I guess. And so my plan was to get lucid in a dream, to find Scott and to ask him questions about himself. Now, the first night I tried this, I was having a nightmare about people trying to break into my house, which is quite a common nightmare theme. And sort of in that panic, I suddenly realised that, I'm dreaming. This isn't real. This house isn't real. There aren't really people trying to break in. So when I became aware of that, I opened the door and I let the burglars into my house. I just said, yeah, come on in, take anything you want. They looked really confused. Anyway, I headed off down the street and I remembered my intention to find Scott. And I kept thinking to myself, okay, so when I turn the corner into the next street, Scott is going to be there. And I kept thinking that. And sure enough, I got to the end of my street, looked right, and up the next street, there was Scott. But I noticed he was stood behind this kind of translucent wall. Like I could make out his sort of silhouette behind it, but not a lot of features. And as I approached this wall, I tried to move it, and the words "access denied" flashed up in red. And I was sort of both confused and amazed by this, because I figured that, I don't know, I think I just thought it would be simple. I would find Scott, ask him a question, we'd be done. I didn't anticipate that my mind would actually try and block me from getting to him. And it was really kind of fascinating, if not frustrating, but I kind of continued doing this over the course of a couple of weeks, I think, where I would sort of get lucid in a dream, trying to find Scott, but there would always be something blocking me. Dream characters might start freaking out and trying to pull me away from Scott. There'd just always be something where I couldn't get to him. But I kept persisting, and over time that barrier kind of broke down. And eventually I was able to speak to Scott and ask him what he represents, or why he's here. And Scott told me that he is kind of this idolised version of myself, this big brother figure. He's all the things that I sort of want to be, all the things that I suppose I am. He was kind of this sort of role model figure of, he looked how I wanted to look, he communicated with people the way that I want to communicate with people. He was all of these sort of things. And what was interesting there as well is I am actually trans, I'm female to male, and Scott always kind of looked how I wanted to look. And then as I've transitioned, as I've been on hormones and everything like that, I do sort of look a lot like how Scott looked in my head. And I found that really interesting, and as well I find that me and Scott now are more integrated. I wouldn't say we've fused, but we're definitely a lot more integrated, and we've been able to work on sort of our relationship. So after I'd done that experiment with Scott, I thought it's time to move on to Darren. And I really wasn't sure what to expect from this. Again, similar to Scott, I thought maybe it would be like, the dream might stop me from getting to him. But I just didn't really know what to expect. And now I think the first dream that I attempted to do this, I did actually find Darren, and he was there. I could see him, as I know what he looks like, and when I tried asking him questions about himself, I was expecting him to get angry, because that's kind of what he's like in the outside daytime world. But instead he was very, very fearful, very, very scared, very panicky, in a way that I hadn't experienced him before. And although I can't really remember off the top of my head now what was going on in the dream, I know he kind of dragged me into a car and drove me away from sort of what was going on in the dream scene. And he kept sort of saying that he was trying to protect me and get me away from people, which was odd. I hadn't ever thought of Darren as being protective necessarily. And these dreams continued. I think it might have been the next one where I was having a dream. I was in the car with my mum, just suddenly realised that it was a dream, got out of the car and sort of went into a nearby building. And as I was walking through the building, I was thinking again, right, when I go through the next door, Darren's going to be in there. And I opened the door into some public restroom, and I noticed there was sort of on my right, there was the sink and a mirror, and then further down were cubicles. And I spotted a figure on the floor in the cubicle. And I went to approach it, and I noticed it was Darren's hoodie. Now, Darren wears a green hoodie, I guess sort of in the inner world or in my mind, the way that I sort of picture him and see him, he wears a green hoodie. And I picked the hoodie up off the floor, and I left the stall, and I looked in the mirror, and Darren was in the mirror. And that was really freaky, because I wasn't expecting that. But it was this weird moment of, Darren was my reflection, which makes sense, but was also just a really bizarre kind of feeling overall. And as I continued with these dreams, I eventually had another lucid dream where I was able to get to him. He wasn't in a mirror or behind anything, he was there. And we spoke a little bit, and he talked about being this kind of protective figure, he is all of the anger that I can't feel or that I can't express. He takes all of the negative things that have happened, and he holds them, and he protects me from them. And I then gave him a hug in the dream, which was again sort of strange, because that's not how I would kind of, Darren isn't a person that I would really want to hug. He's, I feel like he's caused me a lot of grief and a lot of problems over the years, but I realised that in his own slightly confused, messed up way, he is ultimately trying to protect me from my feelings, and I hugged him as a sort of thank you for doing that. And that was just immensely helpful in helping me understand more about, I guess, just DID in general, and the fact, and roles that alters play, and seeing that Darren was really quite fearful and scared, and I suppose almost childlike in a way, really helped me to understand him more. And I guess, because I'd always kind of seen him as someone who was torturing me in many ways, but now I understood that he was dealing with all of the things that I can't, and it was really quite eye-opening, and it gave us a place to start to work from on how we could build our relationship and work together. So I've kind of done the same with other alters as well, and I've done different things, not just asking them outright questions about themselves, but just using that space to sometimes talk or play around. It was a couple of years ago on Christmas Eve. I had a dream, and I got lucid, and I found Scott, and we just kind of hung out for a bit and played on some swings. It's this sort of great tool, I think, for a lot of different things. Now, of course, this isn't going to be for everyone. For one thing, lucid dreaming isn't the easiest thing to do. It does take some practice, so it might not be the most accessible thing for everybody. Also as well, I know in my situation, it felt like the dream wouldn't allow me to access any trauma that I can't deal with. You know, despite the fact that I was awake and alert in my dream, you know, my subconscious mind is still ultimately in control of things, and it always felt like it would prevent me from unlocking anything that I wasn't ready for. But of course, I don't know if this is going to be the case for everyone. So, you know, I guess I would caution people, you know, that it could potentially be triggering. It might bring up some memories or some things that are difficult, or that you weren't expecting. So, you know, as much as I think this is a fantastic tool, and I would love to know if there are other people with DID who have done things like this, you know, I also understand that it might not work for everyone. It might not be the best thing. But since then, I've been sort of really interested in talking more about this, on educating people about it, you know, doing my own sort of work and research into things. So yeah, I guess that is what I wanted to talk about today. Thank you very much for sticking around if you did make it to the end of the video. Thank you very much.